You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.
Hey! Hey, Mrs. Wade!
There's a long goodbye.
Your name, Marlowe?
No, my name is Sidney Jenkins.
Come on, let's go inside, Marlowe. We want to talk to you.
Oh, is this where I'm supposed to say, what is all this about? And he says, shut up, I asked the question.
Yeah, that's right.
And it happens every day.
Right profile.
Sit down. What the hell are you doing here? That's right.
I'm going to read this thing, Swan. Swan, how I love you, how you.
When some passerby invites your eye to come her way.
There's going to be a lot of people looking for me as a result of my lovely wife.
If it was a murderer, he murdered his wife.
That's a lie. I know he didn't kill her. He couldn't kill anybody.
A minor crime, a misdemeanor to kill your wife. The major crime is he stole my money. Your friend stole my money, and the penalty for that is capital punishment.
Even as she smiles a quick hello, you let her go.
I like your face, too. Could you find my husband for me, please, Mr. Marlowe?
You let the moment fly.
I'm a man cannot stand confinement. Who the hell are you?
Well, I'm this here private investigator who was sent here this afternoon to find you.
Did you come here to see me or my wife?
It's none of his business.
Write the check, Roger.
What check?
Write the check, Roger.
Whoa.
Lady, you turn your head. You know you said a long goodbye.
Level Air, you're a born loser.
What do you think, Mabel?
Ow!
If you have any trouble, I'll back you up.
I have fresh evidence now for you to reopen the Terry Lennox case.
You ever think about suicide, Marlboro?
Me? I don't believe in it.
Don't you try to be nice to me now. I'm leaving and it's goodbye. I ain't running after you in the rain when you're catching a plane. No more. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. I'm through this time and I'm here.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me is Mr. Terry Frost.
Hello.
Also with me is Mr. Eric Cohen.
Good to be here.
This week we are discussing Robert Altman's 1973 film The Long Goodbye, adapted by Leigh Brackett, one of the two main writers from Howard Hawks' The Big Sleep. The film stars Elliott Gould as Philip Marlowe, a man now out of time with his world. We've now gone from the first Marlowe book, The Big Sleep, to the last one, The Long Goodbye. No, I take that back. It's not the last book. There are more after this. The two books were separated by 14 years, just as The Big Sleep movie and The Long Goodbye movie were separated by twice that amount of time. In other words, we're seeing different aspects of time being reflected in each of these works. And yes, we'll be spoiling every damned one of them. So if you haven't seen The Long Goodbye, please proceed with caution. Now, Eric, when was the first time you saw The Long Goodbye and what did you think?
First time I saw Long Goodbye, I was in college. I think we screened it in film school. And I remember really, really liking it a lot. As I got older, I became a Robert Altman fan in general. For the longest time, my favorite Robert Altman films were Nashville and McCabe and Mrs. Miller. And then I rewatched The Long Goodbye fairly recently. It was about maybe a little over 4 years ago. We were actually discussing, in the Cinephiles, the program I used to co-host, we did a neo-noir episode, and one of the films we discussed was that. So I rewatched it and just fell in love with it. I absolutely adore this movie. This might become my favorite Robert Altman movie.
How about you, Terry?
I think if I saw it in the cinema, and the two main acts of violence blew me away. It was kind of low-key as the movie is, and there are a couple of acts of violence in there that really blew me away. I thought, yeah, this is great. A movie surprised me, and I love that. I've watched it again a few times since then, and I just keep seeing little bits of extra stuff that every time I watch it, which is a real value when you're watching a movie, is spending your time watching it, but little bits and pieces jump out at you that you weren't previously aware of, and that's always a sign of a good movie.
Yeah, I don't remember being that much of a Robert Altman fan maybe until I saw this film. Like, I grew up watching MASH, the TV show, so watching MASH, the movie, when I was younger was a little bit disconcerting because it's like, whoa, these are different people playing some of my favorite characters. And then I can't remember what my other Altmans were other than going to see Popeye on Pat Gilhool's 10th birthday or whatever. Otherwise, I really wasn't that big of an Altman fan, but I fell in love with this movie the first time I saw it. And I loved Marty Augustine. I loved the scene with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Just everything got so crazy. But to your point, Terry, there are these moments of darkness and violence that will take your breath away and leave this cloud hanging over the movie where you never know when that next moment of violence might come or if it will come. And it leaves you in this state of tension. And then Elliott Gould, his performance is so spectacular. I mean, we've talked about 3 very different incarnations of Marlowe. A lot of people had a lot of problems with this incarnation, but for me, this is one of the 3 main ones. There's a reason why we picked these 3 movies, because to me, these are the 3 aspects of Marlowe that really capture the character. While rewatching this one recently, because I've watched this movie, I don't know how many times this week. I've watched the Japanese TV version of it, been listening to the audio book. I've been reading about this movie. So lots of thoughts bouncing around in my head. And I noticed in this adaptation, there's no patriarch. And it's really kind of interesting because in the last 2 movies that we've talked about, there's always been a real patriarchal role to this. And in this movie, we have that upper crust that we've talked about before, but we don't necessarily have that person sitting on his throne or in his wheelchair or any of those things. We don't have a General Sternwood. We don't have that character there, though he's in the book, but I think it was very smart the way that they eliminated that character from this. And at times, Roger Wade, the character played by Sterling Hayden, seems like he could be that role, but he's so unstable. And that's the thing with so many of these characters is they're so unstable.
Yeah, I think that there are the failed patriarchs in this movie. Of course, there's Roger Wade, Sterling Hayden's character. There's Marty Augustine, who's running the criminal gang, but seems to need to justify everything he does to everybody he talks to. So he's not particularly a strong character in that way. And then you've got Dr. Veringer, played by Henry Gibson, who's trying to control his patients so he can milk them for money. So what you've got is like failed authority figures all through this movie.
We talked about the moments of violence and how that has a cloud over the film. I think it's interesting how Altman presents characters that, when they're introduced, they seem kind of almost buffoonish, almost comical characters. Like when we first see the great Henry Gibson, member of like Altman's repertory, right? It's almost comical, almost slapsticky in how he tries to like keep up with Marlowe and try to figure out who the hell is this guy? Why is he asking for Wade, right? Both he and Augustine are introduced somewhat comically, and yet it's this thing where they go from being like these these like goofy kind of harmless, almost comical versions of what these characters would be in real life to being potent threats with just a snap of a finger. And there's a lot of duality in this film. Like a lot of characters who you think are just, silly kind of, Southern California mistress type who may have approved of murdering somebody. You got Henry Gibson, who's kind of this goofy kind of like scam psychiatrist one moment who threatens this man 3 times his size into giving him his money. And then you have Marty Augustine, who one moment is this kind of goofy parody of a gangster, suddenly, inflicts one of the most, jarring moments of violence in the whole film.
And there's also a real thing about masculinity in here. I mean, we've got, Marty Augustine stripping down to his underwear. He talks about how he stripped down naked in front of his girlfriend his mistress to apologize about that act of violence. We have the whole questioning whether Marlowe is gay by the police and the whole thing about, do you spell that with an E on the end, which is really kind of strange. And then we have Wade, who should be, Sterling Hayden, this mountain of a man who does get slapped in the face by little Henry Gibson. Just one of the most, memorable scenes of the film for me is when that little guy reaches up and slaps Roger across the face. And then Roger Wade he's impotent. He was cuckolded. There are so many things where this major figure who should be this bastion of masculinity is just completely crippled throughout the entire film.
Sterling Hayden, I looked into his background a bit. He was in the OSS during World War II, so he had nothing to prove as a person. And one of the things I liked about him is the vulnerability he shows in this. According to some people, Hayden was pretty much drunk and stoned for most of the movie, but he still gives a really interesting and kind of nuanced performance in this. I liked him in this one.
Oh, he's fantastic in this, and it's sort of canny casting because, he was the star of The Killing, and The Asphalt Jungle. So he was sort of an alumni of film noir, classic film noir. But he wasn't originally cast in that part. It was Dan Blocker, the guy who played Hoss Cartwright in Bonanza, and he died just before they started shooting. So I believe Sterling Hayden was Elliott Gould's suggestion.
Dan Blocker would have been an interesting choice. He played a gangster or something like that in one of the Tony Rowe movies with Sinatra, and gave a good performance in that. So it would have been interesting to see Dan Blocker's interpretation of Wade, which would have been very different, of course, from Sterling Hayden's, but no less deep, because I think he had chops as an actor, which the stereotyping of Bonanza never gave him a chance to really look at.
Though he was fantastic in Bonanza, and I always enjoyed his character as one of the, I didn't really care about Adam or Little Joe. To me, it was all about Hoss. It could have spun off to the Hoss show. I would have been fine. Maybe occasional appearances by Pa or Hop Sing, but really it was the Hoss show for me.
Well, I think the most interesting casting in this film, actually one of the two interesting cast choices in this is New York Yankees pitcher. God, I'm blanking on his name now. He plays Terry Lennox. Jim Bouton. Yeah, Bouton, that's it. Yeah. It's like, why? But it works.
And I would have liked to see somebody else. I think he's kind of the one weak spot in this one. His character doesn't have any nuance, and we don't understand why he and Marlowe are friends apart from their kind of early association when he had a different name. You don't get that kind of rapport that would have really made that relationship work, which would have then informed the last scene of the movie, or almost the last scene of the movie, a lot better than it does.
But he does that. Altman does that a lot, where he kind of likes to mix up non-actors with real actors. I noticed what you were talking about, Terry, at the end of the film, when Terry Lennox is explaining basically his whole story, motivation, everything, when they're in Mexico to Marlowe. And it's almost like Elliott Gould and Jim Bouton? It's almost like they're in two different movies. And I keep asking myself, who is Elliott Gould acting against whenever we see the camera on Elliott Gould? Because it's two distinct styles. I think it worked. I think their dynamic works better in the opening scene. Because it's very laid back. It's very like, okay, these are how guys kind of like, talk to each other, when they're friends and stuff like that. And it didn't require any heavy emoting on his part. But the last scene, I did recognize some of the flaw there a little bit, but it didn't take me out of the film.
I see your point there, yeah.
What's interesting that we do see, one of the first times we see Terry Lennox, the Jim Bouton character, he's pulling on these gloves and it looks like he's got blood on his hands, and so you're just immediately suspicious of him. And Marlowe, throughout this entire movie, is convinced that Terry Lennox is innocent. And it isn't until right towards the end of the movie when he seems to finally come to the realization that Terry Lennox is not innocent. So it really puts Marlowe in an interesting position that, again, talking about having yourself undercut, he is defending Lennox and looking for solutions to prove that Lennox is innocent throughout this entire film. And he's wrong. Our main character is wrong through this entire film, which is really something to take that inflappable Marlowe character. And yeah, we've talked about how Marlowe will like throw out theories, I'm just trying it on for size kind of thing. He'll throw out different theories. He'll make different mixes and matches and those kind of things, but he's usually on top of stuff, and he's usually pretty good when it comes to putting the pieces together. And in this, he's so blinded by that friendship that he can't see the forest for the trees. He can't put those pieces together. And not only is he wrong about Terry murdering his wife, Sylvia, but you also have Marlowe not figuring out that Terry is alive until right towards the end of the movie either. So it's kind of interesting that our character is so flawed from the beginning. And we can kind of talk too about the way that this character was portrayed as being a man out of time, as I talked about in the intro, because the first time we see him, he's being woken up by his cat, and it's as if he was asleep since 1948. He drives this 48 Pontiac. It's like he was asleep from the time that The Big Sleep was written in 1953, and then is waking up 20 years later, and oh, how the world has changed.
One of the things about Gould's interpretation of Marlowe is that he's alert and on the ball when he's on the job. But when he's kind of out in the world going to supermarkets at 3 a.m. or doing anything not directly related to his work, he's kind of just sleepwalking through it. It's like he doesn't engage with the late 20th century world he finds himself in. But when he's talking and asking questions of suspects and clients, he's very much focused on that. But at other times, he's just cut off from everything else around him.
What I like about what they do with this interpretation of Marlowe, they do this thing where it's kind of a riff on the voiceover narration, first-person narration we kind of learn to associate with the film noir genre, but instead it's replaced by Marlowe constantly murmuring to himself, which kind of supplies that kind of like narration that we've seen in like earlier films, and it's very amusing. I love the presentation of Philip Marlowe in this. I watched this film, I'm thinking, gosh, I don't know what to compare Elliott Gould's interpretation to. He's kind of like if Jerry Lewis's Buddy Love wasn't so put together, mixed with a little bit of Marx Brothers. That's kind of this Marlowe, but then there's other stuff there, and it's just such an interesting interpretation. And this particular Marlowe is just lost. He's confused, and he's just amused by everything around him, but at the same time, he just doesn't understand it. And he's just kind of resorted to just talking to himself and amusing himself with his own thoughts.
It's like he wants to be Lieutenant Columbo, but he hasn't quite put it together yet.
I mentioned Popeye earlier, and it kind of reminds me of Popeye, the way that Popeye talks to himself all the time and is giving a narrative around him, commenting on people, but he's doing it all under his breath and muttering. And that's so much like this Philip Marlowe when he's walking away from those girls across the way, and he's just like,
Fudge kind and regular kind.
Mr. Marlowe, you're the nicest neighbor we ever had.
Gotta be the nicest neighbor. I'm a private eye. It's okay with me.
This guy is just always talking, and even when he's, interacting with other people, he seems to keep that running dialogue, especially when he's being questioned by the police.
Sit down, Mr. Marlowe. Don't dirty up my joint. Sit down right here. What's your name now again?
My name?
Yeah.
Without you to mind.
Oh, fuck. What's your name?
My name is Marlowe. Philip Marlowe.
How do you spell
cutie pie, Lieutenant.
Yeah, how do you spell it?
He's a smart ass, that's what he is.
That's what I meant.
Why don't you learn to say what you mean?
He's a real smart ass, Lieutenant.
Hi, boys.
Who's in there? The Jane Hoover's in there?
Sure, we're all peeking through. We got you about American activities, all right? Sure. All right, look. With an E. You got an E on your name.
Yeah.
Is that sounds like a fag name.
Huh? Fag? Is that what you are?
Well, I'm a fag, but I don't know what an E.
George,
Anybody with Philip Marlowe's got to be a fag. Sounds like an Exeter Academy fag.
Right.
Listen, what are you here for?
Well, I'm here because I'm getting ready for the big game Saturday. We're playing Notre Dame, and I hope I catch a touchdown pass. So now I'm going to be at I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm just getting into my makeup.
Well, fags makeup. That's
you got a banjo? I do my aljo.
Sure. This guy sounds like a fag. You dealing dirty work, right? What the hell are you doing here? That's what I like.
I'm going to read this thing Swanee. Swanee, how I love you, how you.
Sure, I get Al Jolson.
He was okay.
Damn right he was all right. But here's what what the hell are we doing?
Just sweat.
You don't tie in this suit, the name Philip Marlowe. What the hell are you from? An Exeter?
Smart ass.
I'm from a long time ago. I went to no prep school.
Nah, you don't look like prep school. But that's not important.
And the way that shot, the whole thing of him in the booth and then the cops outside, and the way that the one black cop is talking to the white cop through the mirror, though he knows that the other guy can't hear him, but the way he's calling him like a honky son of a bitch, it's just like, that's so nice, because we do have a lot when it comes to race and class when it comes to this film, as we did with the other films as well. There's no Orientalism in here, but we do have Mexico as being this foreign land, and that really comes into play as far as, the rules don't apply here in Mexico as they do in the States.
Yeah, I think we've also got to do, just to get back to his initial scenes, we've got to give a shout out to an actor called Ken Sanson, who does a terrific Barbara Stanwyck impersonation as the guard to the Malibu colony. And then he does Walter Brennan and Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart as well. Like those kind of moments of lightness really do carry us through that part of the narrative nicely.
I love the subversiveness to how he subverts like the sort of tropes we associate not just with private detective flicks, but also specifically with Philip Marlowe flicks. There's always that sort of Elijah Cook Jr. character kind of following Marlowe around kind of thing. And here you have that character played by this very dim-witted sort of wannabe wise guy that Elliott Gould's Marlowe just doesn't even bother trying to like shake off his trail. He just walks up to him, gives him the address. This is where I'm going in case you lose me,
Yeah, I kind of wondered where that guy came from. It felt like there was more to that relationship at times. And that's the thing with this movie is at times it feels like it's just being kind of held together more by momentum than other things. I've read about, we've heard like, there's supposed to be an opening bit with Philip Marlowe going to an office building where there was Sam Spade and these other private detectives working. And that, I don't think ever really made it into the final cut, but there were other things that I read about, like, there's supposed to be more of a connecting scene between this and that and this other piece and this other piece. And then Altman cut them out right at the last minute. And it's like, okay, I can kind of see that because there are times where I'm just like, I'm not really sure how he just got from, point L to point N. So where's M in the middle of this? But it works. It all works for me. It almost adds to that dream-like nature of this movie. It's just we're there with Marlowe on that sleepwalk.
There's some rumors around that Steve McQueen was going to do a cameo playing Sam Spade in a scene with Marlowe.
I heard he just showed up on set that day, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I'm not certain myself, but Steve McQueen cameo might have taken us out of the movie, I think, because he was an enormous star at the time. And to have him pop in there playing another character would have reminded us that it's a movie and taken us out of the kind of journey we're on.
And we talked about the way that we're mixing these different actors together to make this wonderful stew. I was very impressed with Nina Van Pallen's role. I thought that she did an interesting job of it. I don't know if she was great or good, but she definitely held my interest because I couldn't necessarily ever figure her out. And I think that's the perfect kind of femme fatale role where you never really know where they're coming from. They really took her role from the book to a whole different place. Like she didn't murder Sylvia Lennox. She doesn't murder Roger Wade. She's complicit in the crime because she and Terry are still together, but she went from a real femme fatale to just somebody who shouldn't be doing the things that she's doing, not necessarily having blood directly on her hands.
Well, she's perfectly cast in the sense that she's that, early 70s Southern California trophy wife or mistress or girlfriend or whatever, She had some notoriety as the mistress of what's his name, the hoaxer novelist, Clifford Irving, right? There's her, Jim Bouton, among other people mixed in with, Elliott Gould, Henry Gibson. Mark Rydell is another very interesting casting choice. I mean, this is a guy who directed On Golden Pond. He was a filmmaker. And I got the sense that Altman just cast. I mean, that's why this is my theory. Don Blocker was really originally cast in the Wade part because they were probably friends. Altman directed a lot of television before he got into film. He probably directed episodes of Bonanza. And he was very, at the time, Gould was in disfavor for the production studios. He hadn't worked for 2 years, and it was Altman that really wanted Elliott Gould to play Marlowe. So you got the sense that Altman's this loyal guy that likes working with certain people, are part of his circle. And, Henry Gibson is the best example of that because he's in almost all of Altman's movies, right? I thought that Nina Van Pallen was interesting casting. She kind of fit that kind of niche persona that Altman was going for in this take on Philip Marlowe story.
Yeah, and Mark Rydell worked with Elliott Gould later as well. He's directed Harry and Walter's Go to New York, yeah. So obviously they liked working with each other.
I don't know if it was Altman himself who picked up on Gould or if it was David Picker who decided on Gould, because this movie, it went through a lot of stuff before it finally came to Altman. I think it started as a project in '68, and Sterling Silliphant wrote the screenplay for it. And then through a series of a couple different directors, they managed to get Leigh Brackett, and she rewrote the script. I think that she did a wonderful job. It was really interesting. I went to the University of Michigan, a couple of years ago now, and looked through the Altman archives and reading the very first draft of the script, which I don't think anybody's ever written about this. It wasn't a Philip Marlowe story. She changed the name to John Carmody, which was another character that Chandler had written about. And then for whatever reason, like Terry Lennox was Terry Lennox, Marty Augustine was Marty Augustine, was Mendy Menendez in the book. All of these characters were there, and there were additional characters, of course, like the Linda Loring character. I think she was Kate Loring or something like that in the screenplay. But yeah, it was a John Carmody mystery at first, and then they switched it to Philip Marlowe in the second draft. So I don't know if there was some sort of rights thing going on or why that was, but I found that very interesting.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether they delayed the making the Leigh Brackett script at the time, because in '69 we had the Marlowe with James Garner in it. So maybe they didn't want to put two into production at the same time. Maybe there was a kind of overlap there that delayed it.
I think Sterling Silliphant wrote the Marlowe in '68. Yes, he did. So it seems like it would have been a two-picture deal there. And then we talked a little bit last week as far as the two producers, Jerry Bick and Elliot Kastner, who bought the rights to The Long Goodbye, and then eventually brought us The Big Sleep and Farewell My Lovely as well. So, I don't know how all that happened and why there was this revival of Chandler in the late 60s, early 70s, but I'm glad that it happened. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other detective movies that were coming out around the same time, because there were some interesting parallels. I read a really nice review comparing and contrasting this one with Chinatown, and this one predates Chinatown by a year, I think, but there are some interesting parallels. I was really glad to see Jerry Jones in here, who is one of the two detectives that pick up Marlowe from the apartment, because Jerry Jones, I didn't recognize him by face, but I recognized him by voice, because he gives a very studious lecture in The Avenging Disco Godfather about the negative effects of angel dust. So as soon as I heard his voice, I was like, that's the guy from Disco Godfather. So sure enough, it was. I was very happy about that.
Is that the guy that's one of my favorite scenes in the movie is when they're in his apartment, and is that the detective that goes, "What is this?" And Marlowe goes, "They're baby shoes." And he just has this like the camera just stays on his face.
Pretty bloody big too. They're more like kids' shoes, yeah.
Oh, they're huge.
Maybe Marlowe had enormous feet when he was a child, yeah.
Yeah, that whole preamble of the cat before we even get to Terry Lennox. I mean, it took a lot of guts to do the whole cat intro, and it really does a great job of introducing us to this character and what he's all about and how far he'll go for a friend, going out at 3:00 in the morning, trying to find Curry brand cat food. And I love that he gets introduced to that black stalker at the market, and that he comes back later on.
What I need a cat for, I got a girl.
Right. And I love he shows up.
Hey, how's your cat? How's your girl? Yeah, I love that scene. I love that scene. And that was pilfered by the Coen brothers for Big Lebowski. For when what's his name? Jeff Bridges was looking for milk.
I know some people have compared The Big Sleep with The Big Lebowski, but I know we talked more 2 weeks ago on Murder My Sweet about The Big Lebowski than we did last week when we were talking about The Big Sleep. And yeah, as I was watching this one this week, I was just like, yeah, there's a lot of The Big Lebowski in here, and I can really see, especially some of these crazy characters. I mean, Marty Augustine, he would really fit well in a Coen Brothers movie.
And Rydell's great in that part. Hilarious one moment, frightening the next. And that second time when he goes to Augustine's apartment or house or wherever he's at, and he brings out his mistress again, you're just waiting for something bad to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gould is crawling up the wall like, I got it.
This is one of the things that pissed me off about the movie. There weren't many, but this is one. The fact that Marlowe doesn't really give a shit about the girl. He kind of offers her a cigarette, but from our viewpoint, talking about abusive spouses and things like that in the 21st century. That just doesn't play right to me looking at it these days. It may well have done in 73, but there's something slightly off about that because Marlowe is a kind of knight without armor as written. And that's one bit where he kind of fails in that mission.
Well, there's a lot in this that Marlowe does things that the literary Marlowe would not do. And I always read that as intentional, especially when we get to the very final scene. That is quintessentially not something Marlowe would do. He shoots his friend. He kills him at the end of the film. You know, having seen this film so many times now, I rewatched it again this morning, just to prepare for this podcast. Elliott Gould's Marlowe, with all his, fuddling about and, muttering to himself and seemingly confused, there is this like bomb ready to go off, and so he sees these things. He saw how Wade, inadvertently hits, his wife, when in his drunken thing. He sees, the violence inflicted by Augustine on his mistress and all that stuff. And finally, he just lets it all out on his friend, the one friend he has, Terry Lennox, the guy who betrayed him. That's who he lets out his form of violence on. And I saw that as sort of his release.
It almost feels like more of a Peck and Paw film at that moment than a Raymond Chandler movie.
Yeah, and the other thing is you don't actually see any kind of wound in Terry Lennox as he falls back into the pool. So there's not that kind of Peck and Paw style of ultra violence. You just see him fall back in an old school 1940s way without a bullet hole. And that's kind of an interesting choice there as well. I did learn a lesson from watching the start of this movie, is you never try to give a cat cream cheese with an egg in it. The cat's not going to accept it.
9 Lives presents Morris.
The castle's almost finished, Your Majesty.
Good. Reserve the dungeon for yourself.
Here's the enchanted tower.
This is her second childhood today.
Hungry, Morris?
Lower the drawbridge. I'm leaving.
Don't be finicky. There's 9 lives.
Hark! The sea winds bring a message.
Liver and chicken, savory stew.
9 Lives savory stew.
9 Lives. Nutritious foods cats really like. Even Morris.
Only fit for a king, 9 Lives.
You can watch this movie just for the animal roles. We talked a little bit on Murder My Sweet when it came to, Moose Malloy and the way that Marlowe was comparing himself to a bird often. And, with this one, the whole cat going out the door that says, El Puerto de Gato. And it's just like, okay, yeah, it's very escaping to Mexico kind of thing. All right. And then all of the dogs at the Wade residence, the dogs that are fucking in the streets in Mexico, all that stuff. It's just like, and I think they even recognize it. I can't remember if it was Pauline Kael or who wrote that, it'll give people, the ability to write term papers about this movie later on when they just look at the dog and cat roles to this. And it's like, yeah, I can kind of see that.
Yeah, you go all the way to Mexico, you film a scene in a movie and get upstaged by a pair of dogs fucking.
Yeah, there's the Wade's dog that's constantly, after Marlowe as well. The camera's always sort of pointed at animals in this film.
Well, that roaming camera is just fantastic. Like, it is not still through 99% of this movie. It is always going someplace and reminding us what voyeur we are and what a voyeur our main character is, trying to solve this kind of stuff and always looking and trying to see things. And then we have things of like the one gangster that you're talking about earlier when he's using binoculars and looking at those girls up across the way from Marlowe's place. And I love how Marlowe never really seems to care about those half naked, if not fully naked women that are right across the way. He doesn't seem to pay them any mind, goes out and gets their fudge brownie mix, doesn't want any part of the brownies or anything.
They hurt my teeth. But Yankee Doodles, on the other hand.
Here's one for you, Mike. Do you realize one of those girls is a previous podcast guest?
I do, yeah.
Absolutely.
Rotanya Alda is one of those, playing Rotanya Sweet in this movie.
No, she was one of the girls, right? Because I saw her name attached, because I met her. I shot a DVD extra. I forgot what the film was that she was in that we shot it for, but yeah. I saw her name come up. I go, wait, who did she play in this film? The mistress? Who did she play? I couldn't figure that out, but it's one of the girls across the street, or across from him. Interesting. Getting back to how it's shot, Vilma Sigmund does a phenomenal job of the cinematography. It's also a beautiful film to look at. They did some flashing which is a post-production term for taking the canister of film or the roll of film and like just exposing it to natural light really quickly and then shutting it. And it gives that sort of like almost LA postcard look to it. Especially that scene where Marlowe's chasing after, shouting, Mrs. Wade, as she's driving away. Just the photography is just phenomenal.
Yeah, it's so much easier doing that stuff now. You just have to kind of use color grading and LUTs.
Yep, or just a goddamn Instagram filter.
One thing I really picked up on this time watching it was the use of the fake names. Obviously, Marlowe gives a couple fake names. At one point, he says he's Donald Duck. He says he's the name Sidney Jenkins. He gets called Marlboro constantly by Roger Wade. But then to find out that both Roger Wade and Terry Lennox had fake names, that Roger Wade was Billy Joe Smith and Terry Lennox was Lenny Potts. And we know from the book that Terry Lennox had a previous name of Paul Marston, which has the same initials as Philip Marlowe. But Roger Wade, I think, was always Roger Wade. But here, him having a former identity, casts kind of a doubt on him, casts doubt on Terry Lennox, and then it's almost like Marlowe's trying to get in on the game a little bit by pretending to be other people too. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say, going back, way back to when I was talking about having John Carmody in, as Philip Marlowe, that name is, I think that was a very intentional thing, because the first time Chandler turned in his manuscript for The Long Goodbye, one of his editors said that Marlowe is becoming too Christ-like, and I think having a character, any character with the initials JC is always suspect as far as, is this supposed to be analogous to Jesus Christ?
How come nobody's ever got an initial M for Muhammad or something like that, or B for Buddha?
Guess it's just the tyranny of Christianity, my friend.
Yeah.
Talking about The Big Lebowski, the real reason why I was reminded of The Big Lebowski is because Marty Augustine is out on Shabbos. He doesn't roll on Shabbos, but now he has to come out and take care of this Philip Marlowe guy, and he's doing it on Shabbos, man. Come on.
Saturday, Donnie, is Shabbos, the Jewish day of rest. That means I don't work. I don't drive a car. I don't fucking ride in a car. I don't handle money. I don't turn on the oven. And I sure as shit don't fucking roll! Shabbos!
That's what's kind of really interesting about the screenplay that they wound up working with. And a lot of it was also improvised. Like Altman let especially Gould and Hayden improvise a lot. It's not a faithful adaptation of the novel at all. The novel's really convoluted, probably more convoluted than The Big Sleep. And yet Leigh Brackett kind of like just really stripped it and streamlined it and just took certain elements from the novel and kind of created this different animal. But there's still these like little like shout outs, references to the novel, like, Marty Augustine mentioning that he's working on the Shabbos, right? He shouldn't be here doing this thing. I had to come out and do this thing, whereas in the novel, he doesn't work on the Shabbos, right? So it's like these little interesting kind of like it's like the filmmakers are reminding you, I know this isn't faithful, but we're just trying to prove to you, we have read the novel. It's not like we haven't.
And is Augustine his real last name, or is it like something like Leibowitz or something like that? So there's another potential fake name as well, because Augustine doesn't sound right.
One other thing that reminded me of the Coen brothers, sorry to kind of harp on this, but is the song. The Long Goodbye song, and the way that we have all these different incarnations of the song, to the point of, in those opening credits, the way that we're cross-cutting between Terry Lennox and Philip Marlowe, and we have two different versions of the same song that are playing that are really at odds with one another. And it's interesting that you can have two versions of the same song really fighting with each other in that part, but then the way that the song comes back as the funeral march, it comes back as the doorbell, it comes back as these things. It so reminds me of the Raising Arizona theme, like when High is running away from the cops after he's robbed the Quickie Mart, and he runs into the grocery store, again with the grocery store, and it's suddenly the Muzak version of the Raising Arizona theme. So it's just, that's one of my favorite bits of that movie, is the way that the song changes when he goes from place to place. And having that same thing, I really think that they ended up taking that from The Long Goodbye, and that use of the Long Goodbye song, which I have to admit has been stuck in my head all frickin' week. So luckily it's that version by the guy who did the Conjunction Junction song, so I've got his jazzy interpretation of it.
The thing that I always thought was brilliant about that, yes, the fact that the entire soundtrack is made up of variations of that song, but I love how the movie starts off with the cliche classic noir version of that song. That 70s films, all the 70s films that were like trying to do the film noir thing or harken back to like the Robert Mitchum, Philip Marlowe ones, even Chinatown, have that kind of opening kind of jazzy score, sort of Mike Hammer kind of theme song. And then it cuts into this like Muzak version when he's in the supermarket. And I thought that was brilliant because Altman kind of like plays with your anticipation of, is this going to be another 70s take on noir? Because, here it is, a cliche music we associate with noir, and then it becomes something entirely different. And I just love that.
I think it kind of gets used once or twice too often. It becomes a kind of, he's made his point, but then he keeps doing it. For me, there was just one or too many iterations of it in there.
It worked for me. I mean, even when they got to Mexico and they were doing the funeral dirge version of it, I was just like, okay, this works. But like I said, the danger is that it got stuck in my head all week.
That interaction he has with the coroner, and I guess he's supposed to be the chief of the local police, that's hilarious. That is very funny stuff where they're just falling over themselves trying to please him. And he's just Private Dick from LA. And the whole scene, like when he's in the car where he's trying to bribe them and he's trying to justify giving them the money and they keep turning it down, but they keep changing the story.
And that's filmed beautifully too, with just the two hands and the $5,000 bill on the center console of the car. I mean, that's a nice choice there. I kind of like that. You didn't have to have any face acting from the actors. You just had to have the voices and their hands and a piece of money told the story.
Yeah, I always picture those three guys like in a sound booth somewhere recording that because I don't think any of those guys were anywhere near that car. None of those hands were their hands. It just all felt like second unit stuff of like, oh shit, we need to do something here. Get these guys in a sound booth quick.
But it worked.
Yeah, it totally worked.
David Carradine cameo in the jail cell.
Yes!
Yeah, absolutely. Just before he kung fu. David Carradine laying on a bloody cell in jail and having a chat with Marlowe. They've been hanging out for 3 days and they've really bonded nicely.
It's the most anti-David Carradine performance I think I've ever seen. I would say this is a weird kind of loopy anecdote on my part. I'm sorry if this seems to be going way off track, but watching David Carradine in this reminds me of when I met the actor Scott Glenn. For the listeners who don't know, Scott Glenn is this great stoic kind of like He-Man actor, kind of in a Clint Eastwood mode. He's been in so many films. He was in Silence of the Lambs. He was in, so many stuff. Anyways, I worked on a show that Scott Glenn, was an actor in, and meeting him in person, he's nothing like the roles he plays. He's very chatty. He's very loose. I would say he was like an aging hippie type. He was saying man a lot and very, limber and loose and kind of animated and stuff like that. And seeing David Carradine in this kind of reminded me of my meeting Scott Glenn, because David Carradine is nothing like the David Carradine in anything else. He's like just this chatterbox that just won't stop talking. Even the corrections officer that tells Marlowe he can leave is even telling him, you need to shut up or otherwise your lips are going to fall off.
Yeah, when the shout out to the Thin Man where Marlowe calls the dog Asta. I kind of like that bit as well. There's these little Easter eggs during this movie where they're just little bits of business that kind of work and remind you of that theme that, yes, they are in Hollywood. And the movie is bracketed by Hooray for Hollywood at the start and the finish.
The final shot is a reverse gender swap take on The Third Man.
Mm.
I was just thinking about some of the other mishearings and misnamings of people. I talked about how Wade calls him Marlboro, and then there's Dr. Derringer instead of Dr. Behringer, so calling him by the name of a gun is interesting. And then that whole thing that you guys were just talking about with the coroner and the head of police down in Otataclan, and just all of those mishearings that happened, like where he's says I'm the coroner, but the way that he says it, it looks like colonel, or it sounds like colonel, and when he talks about the diseased instead of the deceased. And I guess what reminded me of that too was just the subtitles were going nuts during this movie. Whoever did the subtitles for the DVD release didn't really understand what was being said sometimes. So since Marlowe has that cigarette in his mouth throughout almost this entire movie, I think he's one of the few characters that smokes, if the only character. And when he calls Asta, he's got that cigarette in his mouth, so the subtitler caught Aster instead of Asta. And it's just like, come on. And like, they screwed up the line when he says, when Marty Augustine says to the one guy, your father was a Moyle. And I can't remember what he says, but it like the subtitles was something like, your father was immortal or something like that. And it's like, what?
I hope they didn't misspell albino turd.
Watching it this morning, I was going to count how many cigarettes Marlowe smoked during the movie, and I gave up about the time he and Terry Lennox got together for the first time, because there are just so many cigarettes there. And then he, what we call here in Australia, donkey roots one cigarette off the other and chain smokes them. This is not an anti-smoking movie at all.
Well, what's funny about that is I don't know what is funnier, the fact that he always has a cigarette in his mouth, or that everyone around him don't seem to care. It's like you just walk into any house, any room with a cigarette in his mouth, and anyone who's living there doesn't seem to be like fazed by it. But no one else is smoking.
Yeah, he's in hospital with a cigarette. No, that's probably the reason the guy gave him the harmonica, to try to wean him off cigarettes. The guy who's totally mummified in bandages hands him that tiny harmonica for no reason. I think he just wants him to stop smoking.
That's brilliant. I always thought the guy was trying to reach for the cigarette, and Marlowe misunderstood it, took his harmonica instead. But you know what? I like that interpretation better.
I think it works. And I really like the other thing that gets me, and kind of these details hang in my head enormously when I watch a film, is Henry Gibson's enormous comb-over. It was reminiscent of something in recent political history, but I can't recall what.
I think that the cigarettes are supposed to be some sort of commentary on, like, the health consciousness of 1973 California. Everybody is tan. The women across the way are doing yoga, doing aerobics, all these kind of things. And people other than drinking seem to be more health conscious than Marlowe is. And Marlowe is that throwback. He's got the old car. He's got the cigarettes and everything. He wears the suit. He's one of the few people that wears a suit in this movie. And the one thing I regret about the flashing that you talked about when it came to the look of the film is that apparently his coat and pants were mismatched and his tie had little American flags on it, and you can't see those after they did that effect to the movie. They look like they're the same color, but that would have been another thing to say, like, what a rumpled guy this is. I mean, he already looks rumpled. He already looks like he needs a shave in a lot of the scenes, which I think is kind of like natural Elliott Gouldness, but they really played up that he's kind of this shabby detective. Shabby chic, as it were.
No, that kind of worked for me. I mean, the tie thing, even just going out to the supermarket wearing a tie at 3 a.m. I'm lucky if I wear pants going out to the supermarket at 3 a.m. But him, he kind of did the full dressing up bit.
And he's so concerned about that tie when he goes in to save Roger. He's like, here, hold my tie.
We talked about this with The Big Sleep, the Robert Mitchum version. And I mentioned how that take on Marlowe was too put together, too slick. He had too nice a car. And this version, it's the complete antithesis to that. He has a vintage car, but it's junk. He's dressed in a suit, but it's completely rumpled. He probably sleeps in that damn suit. And more than any of the other Marlowe incarnations, I really feel like I can smell the smoke and the BO on, Elliott Gould's take on the character, because he just seems like he hasn't slept. He seems like he was in a prison cell for like 3 days or however many days it was he was in there. The guy just never seems fully clean or hygienically all there.
Yeah, that he's sleeping in his clothes when we first see him and getting woken up by that cat. It's just like, yeah, how long has this guy been laying there, and when was the last time he showered?
It's probably good that he went for that dip in the ocean, though. In that case, yeah, clean you up a little bit. But I kind of like that scene, Wade's scene where he wades into the ocean. Wade. There's a chaos to that kind of plays naturalistically. So when people are actually drowning or when there's any kind of crisis like that, it does play that way where, you don't realize quite what's happening. Then you realize what's happening, and then there's a delay while you get stuff done. It played realistically to an unusual degree during that scene. I kind of appreciated that.
No, I like that a lot. And I like that whole thing of the dog holding the cane at the end of that is really nice.
Mm. Yeah, it really did work.
At one point, it feels like Marlowe loses his car. Like, I know Marlowe gets driven around a lot in the books and in the movies as far as, getting picked up by people and being taken to places, being taken to the Malibu colony, being taken to Marty Augustine's place. But I was curious why he takes the bus down to Mexico rather than driving himself down there. I have to admit that I have no knowledge of California geography at all, because it feels like you can go from Los Angeles to Tijuana or to Mexico really fast. I thought that was a little farther than going there, but I have no idea.
2.5 hours or so. I've taken the train from LA to San Diego, and then I went over to Tijuana on a bus. So, yeah, 2.5 hours on a freeway sounds about right. 2.5 to 3 hours, yeah.
Yeah, I never understood why he took a bus either.
Because, at one point he seems to just kind of lose his car. Like, the way that he chases her on foot through the streets and everything, I realized he was probably taken to Augustine's and then sees her come out with the money. And it took me a long time to put that together, that she dropped off the money. I don't know why it took me that long. I guess I was just staring at Arnold Schwarzenegger's impressive pectoral muscles at that point. Yeah, and then him chasing her. And it was interesting when I thought about it this time, when he gets hit by the car and he blacks out, it's kind of like that black pool opening at his feet. He has to get knocked unconscious at least once during these movies.
It's a good way from getting from one scene to another. But one thing I saw about Arnold Schwarzenegger in that movie, he should never have a mustache. It really doesn't suit him. The mustache didn't work. It's an odd one. You go, okay, we'll get the Austrian guy in, but we won't let him talk.
Which would have fit, though, with Marty's gang. The whole thing of Marty having all the different ethnicities working for him, I found very interesting. And I really like the guy, is it Pepe, who's like, Marty, I don't want to take off my shirt. I got too many scars.
I love how Augustine is so considerate about it. He's like, okay, you go in another room. Just,
Yeah, well, forget the scars you put on your girlfriend's face, but, you're okay. Yeah.
Yeah, again, going back to the screenplay, I am really glad that they cut down on the amount of characters. I'm glad that they cut down on, I know this is going to be a little sacrilegious for me to say this, but I feel like The Long Goodbye was an overwritten book. Like, listening to it, it feels like it takes him 3 or 4 pages to just cross the room sometimes. And it's just like, come on, dude, just get there. And I kind of miss that rat-a-tat patter and the really quick clipped prose of the more hard-boiled novels. And there are times, like, the way that he finds Dr. Veringer is pretty easy in this movie. It's not that easy in the book. But what's even worse is that once he goes to visit Veringer, he has 2 other Dr. V's that he can look for, and he goes and visits at least one other one. It's just like, come on, dude. We didn't need this scene in here whatsoever. Just cut right to the chase. Get back to this guy. This is the guy. Like, even listening to the book that I was doing, I was like, no, he's got to be the guy. He has to be the guy. And then when Marlowe goes and investigates another doctor, I was just like, wow, we're really just getting away from the plot here. And that weird crisscrossing of the Sylvia Lennox was sleeping with Roger Wade, and then Terry was sleeping with Eileen, but in some versions, some characters don't sleep with one another, and in other versions they do. So depending on if you're reading the book, some of the early drafts of the screenplay, or watching the movie, all of that stuff changes. I know Chandler at one point said to his publishers, this mystery seems like it's fairly obvious. And I don't think it is. I really don't think it is, because even reading the book, I'm like, well, I'm not sure exactly what this person's motivation was for this, that, or the other thing. And definitely when watching this movie, it leaves a lot of questions, but I'm kind of glad it does leave questions. I think everything is kind of summed up in the end, and I think it was smarter to have Roger kill himself rather than being the victim of a murder. Just keeping it to the one murder at the beginning and then the revenge at the end, I think was a lot smarter than all the convolutions that they were doing, and keep some of these other characters out of the mix.
I totally agree with you, Mike. Like I said earlier, the novel's too convoluted for its own good. There's just way too many things going on. I mean, even the Terry Lennox reveal. I mean, he's undergone plastic surgery, right? To look like a Mexican. It gets a little ludicrous for even Chandler's, thing. And my understanding of this is that, Chandler also wrote the novel during a very difficult time in his life. I think his wife was dying. I think he mentioned that this was a very personal book for him. If that was the case, I wish he just focused on the characters and not tried to make such a convoluted mystery, because I think Leigh Brackett and Robert Altman together crafted something far more streamlined and just far more effective story-wise. I mean, there's no complications. We understand the story as it unfolds. And when we get the reveal at the end, it's almost an afterthought, because what it's really about is how, Marlowe was not a step ahead of everybody and how that affects him.
And Marlowe's going on this kind of, not necessarily a revenge thing, but trying to understand Terry Lennox's death, which is the main engine for him, apart from money people throw at him, is to understand the circumstances around which his friend went to Mexico and died. And then it becomes something else entirely during that process. So that's a clean through line where we think we're going to find out that Terry Lennox was killed by one of the characters and Marlowe's going to get revenge. That's the first thought I had when I first saw the film. And again, it turns into something else, but it's a very clean motivation for the main character apart from the money, because in a lot of detective novels, the motivation starts out as the money and then becomes something else. And this one does that as well to a certain extent. But it's a very kind of personal story for Marlowe. And I think that this movie conveys that, even if the Terry Lennox character is kind of weakly acted.
The other thing that I just thought about is the way that when Marlowe finally manages to get a quote-unquote confession out of the Eileen Wade character, that when he goes to the cops and says, I want this case reopened and I want this to, I have new evidence and here's what's happening. And they're like, yeah, we know. We know all this. So again, the cops are further ahead in this mystery than Marlowe is. He, again, is a very ineffective detective in this movie. And I also appreciate, we're talking about how Gould plays his character a lot differently, is that when he is yelling and screaming at the cops, the way that he's walking away from them yelling, you would never think that Humphrey Bogart would drop a motherfucker on the cops, but sure enough, this version of Marlowe does, which I kind of appreciated.
What I love about that moment, again, I go back to what I said before about how the filmmakers, even though we're not making The Long Goodbye, we're showing you that we have read the book. They have a firm understanding of who Marlowe is and what he does, and then they subvert it. There's this through line in all the books where Marlowe likes to get his subjects drunk so he can get more information out of them, right? And there's a scene where he sits down and agrees to have a drink with Wade. And he encourages more drink, so that he can get more information from Wade, right? When they're sitting out, on his porch. And then we have a sort of a parallel scene, that moment where he's yelling at the cops and all that stuff. He's gotten, you could argue, I don't know if he personally got her drunk, but she's been drinking, Mrs. Wade, and she reveals her take on everything to I was going to say Chandler, to Marlowe. But the twist here is that Marlowe himself is also drunk now. And that's something I've always asked myself, of all these times that Marlowe's been getting his subjects drunk, all that stuff, why isn't he getting drunk? Because he's drinking with them. And here we have that answer. Yes, Marlowe is drunk as well.
And there's a bit of a hint earlier in the film too, where Mrs. Wade says, my friend instead of your friend, when they're talking about Terry Lennox. So there's that little slip up there, which kind of foreshadows what actually happens. And on the first viewing, you let it go. and think, okay, well, she made a mistake then, and they did that to make the character sound like a real person. But on rewatching the film, you go, okay, well, they did do a bit of foreshadowing there, and they did it quite well and with a little bit of subtlety.
And it's keeping with her character. That's why Nina Van Pallant was kind of perfect casting for that character, because you needed this like this bleach blonde, tan, sort of Southern California type, woman to play a part like this, because everything is kind of laid back, but there's that little kind of, layer of passive aggressiveness, right? And everything that she says that's maintained throughout the film. Like the moment when they're throwing the party and, Wade has his like tantrum. He smashes the bottle and then, the doctor takes him back and gives him the check. She's still in that same laid back kind of, but slightly passive aggressive. Okay, everybody. Well, sorry. The party's over, I guess, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that scene also has a bit where she's not acting very well, because when they're doing the kind of mid shot of Roger ranting and raving, there's a moment when you see Nina Van Pallant smiling at the way that Sterling Hayden's acting. And then they cut to a close-up of her, and she's in a totally different emotional state than in that scene. So it's, getting a non-professional actor in has its pluses because you get that rawness, but it's also got its downside when you're kind of cutting between different shots.
I didn't notice that. That's funny. I have to seek that out the next time I see it. But I like those moments. There's a little moment kind of like that, but I think it enhances the scene where Gould is surrounded by Augustine's goons and they're all undressed except for him. And he turns to look at one and he starts to crack up. And I wonder if that's Elliott Gould cracking up and not the character.
Possible, yeah.
Yeah, she reminded me, Nina Van Pallant really reminded me with her character of the Jennifer Warren character, Paula from Night Moves, that kind of more, she's not necessarily beautiful, but she's a very handsome woman. I don't know exactly what the difference is in my mind, but she's not a beauty, but there's something earthy and real and pleasant about her.
And direct.
And I like that their dinner scene, and then to go back to what you were saying earlier, I really like that reveal of Wade wading into the ocean. Is really nice, that shot between them and the way that he comes up and is out of focus and going into the ocean. That's a very nice shot.
That's a fantastic shot. It's almost a reverse of an earlier shot where Wade and his wife are having that conversation, sort of an argument. We see them having that argument, and then we realize we see them through a window, and then we see Marlowe's reflection, sort of playing around on the beach, on the window.
Yeah, all those reflection shots, I mean, especially with that beach house and the windows of that door wall, just remarkable stuff.
Which was Robert Altman's house.
Yeah, I was going to say that, yeah. He knows every angle of that place, which is useful.
I think he walked around his own house with his fingers up doing a rectangle like that. So I am so excited to have an interview with Elliott Gould on this episode. I've been working at having a proper interview with him since, I think, 2011 or 2012. I have actually been working on, and I put working in quotes, I've been playing around with the idea of doing a book about Gould for a long time. My original idea was to do a book where it was all of the films that Elliott Gould was in the 1970s on one side, and then you flip it over and it was all the films that Donald Sutherland did in the 1970s on the other, because these two guys intersected, their careers intersected at least 3 times during the 1970s. And, one of the biggest films of the 1970s, MASH being one of them, and then Little Murders, which I really enjoyed, and then Spies, which is a kind of a questionable movie. But then just to look at their filmographies and just, separating out what Gould did, looking at the movies that he made in the 1970s is just this roller coaster ride of interesting, sometimes bad, sometimes phenomenal. You look at something like The Silent Partner, compare that with something like Whiffs or Matilda. And so all these years ago, I thought about doing this and really tried to get it going. I actually talked with Gould. He was like, yeah, I would like if somebody wrote a book about me. It would be great to have a biography. And so I went out and I talked to people that were involved with things like, I talked to Peter Hyams about busting in Capricorn 1. I talked to Joe Walsh about California Split, talked to all these different people about all these different films from the 1970s. And then I managed to, this was when I was unemployed for a little bit, and then I got a job. And then I wasn't, and then I also have this job of doing this podcast. So that kind of went on the back burner. But every once in a while I would reach out to Gould, see like maybe we can still work on this together. So it was nice to finally be able to sit down with him and talk about this stuff. And I have to say that this interview goes all over the place. We talk mostly about The Long Goodbye, but then I tried to get little information more about what led up to it. We talked about how he's kind of in the wilderness for a little while between all of these films he did in 1970, 71, maybe even into 72, but then there was a real just work stoppage right in there, especially in 1972. We talk about that, and we kind of go around the mulberry bush a little bit with some of that stuff. So I just want to warn people that this is kind of a meandering discussion, but hopefully people enjoy it. So with all that in mind, we're going to take a break, play this interview with Philip Marlowe himself, Elliott Gould, and we'll be back right after these brief messages.
Attention, attention. Are you a fan of MASH, one of the most groundbreaking television series in history? Then take a listen to the MASH 4077 podcast, where hosts Kenny, Simon, and Al discuss their thoughts episode by episode. They will also share with you some little-known behind-the-scenes information, trivia, and so much more. So come and find them on iTunes by searching MASH 4077 podcast or online at www.mash4077podcast.com.
In 1985, a curious phenomenon occurred. The Twilight Zone returned to television, featuring all new tales of mystery and imagination from the minds of Ray Bradbury, Harlan Ellison, George R.R. Martin, and Stephen King. Dreams for Sale, the Twilight Zone 85 podcast looks back at that land of shadow and substance and re-examines the groundbreaking successor to Rod Serling's legacy. Featuring new interviews with the show's creators and cast, Dreams for Sale can be found on iTunes and at twilightzone85.com. Dreams for Sale. We'll be waiting for you in the Twilight Zone.
Hey, do you like movies? Of course you do. You're listening to Mike White's phenomenal podcast, The Projection Booth. I'm here, however, to tell you about another movie-loving podcast, The Shameless Picture Show. My name is Michael Byers, and the show was created by myself and my good buddy in filmmaking, Nick Richards, in 2016 as a way for him and I to stay connected and to keep movies in our lives. The premise is simple. Each of us composed a list of shame filled with movies we've either missed, had no interest in, or just feel the other one should have seen. We've covered a wide range of films, from Heathers, The Godfather, The Exorcist, You're the Hunter from the Future, Phantom Tollbooth, a slew of amazing Vinegar Syndrome titles, and some that are not so good, plus our massive Rocky episode that features a new interview with Lloyd Kaufman himself, talking about his friendship with John G. Avildsen. And I personally can't wait for you to hear us and join the fight to keep film culture alive. You can find our show on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and of course, SoundCloud.
I'm Chris Cooling from Forgotten TV, and you're listening to The Projection Booth, the ultimate movie podcast.
The focus of the interview is The Long Goodbye. But I want to ask, as far as like how you came to the role, and even going back a little bit before that, as far as your relationship with Robert Altman, if that's okay.
Well, I had met Robert Altman at 20th Century Fox when I was asked to meet him to talk about my participating in MASH. And Bob gave me the script of MASH. I read it, and then I came back to meet with him again, and he asked me how I felt about the part of Duke, the American Southerner, the part that Tom Skerritt played. And I said, I've never questioned an offer. All I want to do is work, but be rather intense being validating me as an American Southerner. I could do it. I have a musical ear. But this character of Trapper John McIntyre, if you haven't cast him, I've got the juice, I've got the energy and for it. And Bob, it's almost like he let me cast myself. And he gave me that part. That's how and when I met Bob, and we did MASH. And it was, and he introduced me to Donald, who had been a cast before me. And Donald and I became very close. I didn't understand how Bob worked. I wasn't used to that kind of work, that kind of improvisational work. And Donald and I, had a problem about it, and we complained about it. But then Bob reshot a scene, and we got on with it, and it turned out to be a great collaboration. So as that, I couldn't do McCabe and Mrs. Miller. He had asked me to do that, and of course it turned out great with Warren Beatty and Julie Christie. But then I had fallen out of grace and was looking for work a few years after that. It all happened very quickly. I went up to United Artists to meet David Picker, who was running United Artists. He was a friend of mine, and he gave me Leigh Brackett's script of The Long Goodbye, which was, of course, based on Raymond Chandler's novel. And it was sort of a pastiche. We thought another director was going to do it. I think that was Peter Bogdanovich at the time. And Peter Bogdanovich couldn't see me in the role. He had other thoughts. And but then David Picker gave the script to Robert Altman, and Bob Altman called me from Ireland, where he was just finishing the picture he did before this, Images, with Susanna York. And Bob called me in New York City and said, "What do you think about Long Goodbye?" And I said, "I've always wanted to play this guy." And he said, "You are this guy." And that was the beginning of the picture.
How familiar with the Chandler books were you before this? Because you've kind of become associated with Marlowe through all the audio books since then.
That's nice of you. I think I may have recorded just about all of Raymond Chandler's books on tape, and even did Poodle Springs, the book that he didn't finish. That is the guy's name, Robert Parker. Was he the one who finished it? For me, it's The Long Goodbye. That was, in a way, almost like my first picture, where Bob gave me this opportunity to really invent and create a character who was way different than how the character had been played before.
Had you been a big Chandler fan before that?
I was a great fan of the movies. It's funny, in The Long Goodbye, when Bob let me say, and improvise, Bob gave me so much freedom when I say to the mummified guy in the hospital room, "I've seen all your pictures too." Then subsequently, I recorded the Chandler books on tape. I was a fan of the genre, but I'm not an intellectual.
What is that process once you get Brackett's script, once you are told you are the guy? How do you then approach the material and become Philip Marlowe and get to where we end up getting when it comes to the final product?
I live it. The first scene that we did is not even in the movie anymore. The first shot that we did, it was the idea of there being an office building, and lots of different private eyes had their offices there, including Sam Spade. And I would walk in, and walked in. That was the first day, and you see him wake up. I mean, he's sleeping in the beginning. I mean, he's like Rip Van Winkle. So what was the process? Bob Altman gave me all of this room to be inventive based on what Leigh Brackett wrote and what Bob Altman, for instance, the first thing that he told me before we started to shoot was that the story was about how he fed his cat, that you can't lie to a cat. And in the scene where he's trying to give the cat some cat food, but the cat is used to curry brand cat food. And Bob said that was the thematic, as far as in nature, you can't lie to nature. I'll see if I can be a little clearer or more focused in terms of how we did it. how we do it, which is we have a shooting schedule. We don't shoot in sequence. Bob said to me, once we agreed that I would do this with him, that there was only I should read the Chandler book, The Long Goodbye, and read something called Chandler on Chandler, which just had all kinds of information about Raymond Chandler's creation of Philip Marlowe. He had done the other Private Eyes, but we're talking The Long Goodbye and Philip Marlowe. So there are many different scenes in it where Bob and I work really closely. And sometimes, Bob didn't necessarily know what I was going to do, but it's not a mystery. We have a shooting script, we have a production schedule, and we have to be able to conform time-wise to that. And then Bob gave me all of this room to spread my wings and to invent and to collaborate and create with Bob this character.
By the time you got onto the project, was there already that decision to place this in the early 70s, or was there ever talk of...
No, that was the present. The early 70s was the present, and that's a good thing that we can... It's now. And even the sequel that we did a little bit of work on in later years, which we have not made, which is based on an earlier piece of work of Raymond Chandler's called The Curtain. It's now, even though this is in the 70s. When we shot it in the 70s, it was now, and now is always now. If that makes any sense, you have a character whose values have all but disappeared, and wakes up and gets involved in this story, and the story then unfolds. And Bob made this picture with me, which I'm so privileged and grateful for.
The old line is to never work with kids or animals, but then you had to end up working with this cat so much in the beginning.
Who said that?
It's just an old adage I've heard of.
No, I don't. No. I love children and animals. Yeah, I know W.C. Fields felt that way. No. And there were two cats. I had a clicker, and there were two cats that looked alike. And as far as film technique and film science, I discovered in the fourth picture, and I hadn't made MASH yet. I hadn't participated. I hadn't even met Bob yet. But in the fourth picture that I participated in, but I think maybe it was The Confession, The Night They Raided Minsky's, and then Bob and Carrie was the third picture. I discovered my first objective relationship in existence, in life, and it was with a camera. And I realized that the camera didn't give me problems. I gave me problems. The problems didn't manipulate me or in any way. It just reported what I was doing. And that really was the first objective relationship. Otherwise, everything was totally subjective. I didn't know what anything meant. The camera really helped to save my life.
Well, when it comes to the camera in The Long Goodbye is always moving. And how was that worked out?
Until he pulls the trigger. Until the end, yeah. I just recently watched Vilma Zsigmond do a YouTube, that was on YouTube, an interview, and he talked about that. It's always moving. Yeah, it's like life. I mean, we wouldn't be alive if we didn't move. I mean, life is moving through us all the time.
How conscious of his camera did you have to be? I mean, when it came to the blocking and all that, because it feels so naturalistic.
No. I mean, the one thing that I know is that nature makes no mistakes, and that was my choice as far as my own existence and taking the road, the nature. So, no, I mean, there are marks that we work with. It's a crew. It's a team of people. So, that I didn't ever have a problem there. not ever a problem.
The thing I always appreciated about Bob Altman's films was just the variety of people that would be in there. And I was curious as far as cause you had worked with Fred the Hammer Williamson, a few times, but in MASH in particular, and worked with non-professional actors. And in here you also had I can't remember if Jim Bouton had done anything before this.
No, Jim Bouton hadn't. No, not at all. He pitched for the Yankees.
He was a natural, though. He was fantastic.
He was good as Terry Lennox, yeah.
How was it working with him or Nina Van Pallant? I don't think that she had been in a lot of stuff.
She was. Bob asked me to do her test with her, and I wouldn't have thought of her for it. I thought it would be a younger person, but I knew that Bob knew what he was going for. It's his picture. So I did her test, and that's where I found we were able for me to put my wardrobe together. Those two, a mismatched a blue jacket and pants, a white shirt, and the tie, which had little American flags on it.
And how was it going toe-to-toe with Sterling Hayden at that point?
Oh, perfect. Because originally Dan Blocker was cast to play Roger Wade, and Dan had been Bob Altman's friend. And when Dan died, Bob almost canceled the picture, and then we didn't know what we would do to recast. And then Bob decided on Sterling, and I met Sterling at the house that Bob was living in, which was the actual house that Roger Wade and Nina Van Pallant's character were living in. And so I wanted to be a little alone with Sterling, just in a room before we started to shoot. He had been in Ireland working with R.D. Laing, who had written a book. I think he was some person dealing with psychology or whatever his science was, and the name of the book was Knots. But I sat there with Sterling, and I knew that Sterling knew that I knew that Sterling knew that I knew that I understood him. I loved working with Sterling Hayden. He was great. I sometimes think about a category for the Academy Awards for performances that were not as recognized in their time. And certainly Sterling Hayden was great. He was just great. This was before he did The Godfather.
That scene of you and him on the beach when you're just having a conversation and drinking the aquavit, that is just amazing. And was that on the page at all, or were you guys just...
Yes, and that too, where the camera is not only moving, it's making a circle around us, and we didn't even know how it could be edited, how we could edit it. But again, I mean, we worked so well together, and and it worked out. It was just great. One of the things that's interesting when they put the picture on DVD, they have a picture of Philip Marlowe, my Philip Marlowe, walking out of the ocean there, and I never had a gun in my hand. I didn't have a gun in my hand until the end of the picture where I pulled the trigger, and they put a gun in my hand. It's there and all of these things, and I mean, I don't want to live with any kind of resentment. I don't want to live with any kind of jaded discontentment. It is what it is. But there wasn't a gun in my hand, and I guess the people who were packaging the product put the gun in my hand for whatever reason they thought was their reason. But that's their business. The picture belongs to them. But we don't belong to them.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I know there was such emphasis placed on the advertising campaign and just the way that it was kind of a misfire initially, and then going to Jack Davis and having him do the second poster for it. Do you think that the poster affected things, or was it just the timing or the locations where the film was being released?
Whoa. The film opened at the Grauman's Chinese, with an ad that was rather stereotypical, very flattering. I mean, part of me was saying, "Oh, great, you know, I mean, I've got a smoking gun, I've got a cat, you know, on my shoulder," but that's not what the picture was about. And when we opened, Charles Chaplin, who is a very significant film critic here in Los Angeles, he almost buried the picture because there were people who were really angry and really upset that we had broken the mold of the character, where I'm more of a jazz player. I'm more of a doing it like a jazz artist, you know, somebody waking up out of time and place, and which is Bob Altman. And so they took the picture down, and then they reopened it in New York. And I never really thought or knew why didn't they open it in New York to begin with. And then they did the Mad Magazine thing, which I thought was also a bit extreme, you know. But I mean, I'm again very gratified and grateful that the picture has not only held up, but is in some places recognized as something that's somewhat unique.
I've read a lot of the notices from when it came out, and one of the things that just kept coming back was Elliott Gould hasn't had a hit in a while. And that just, looking at that statement in 2018 just seems bizarre to me, because you had been in so many movies in 1970, 71, and even, 70 and 71.
No, I know exactly. I mean, I have this recall, you know. So, I had been working with Ingmar Bergman prior to The Long Goodbye, but in between The Touch, the Ingmar Bergman picture, and The Long Goodbye, I attempted to start my own picture for Warner Brothers. And I had a 2-picture deal, and the second picture was based on a book called A New Life by Bernard Malamud, who wrote The Natural. But I was not able to make, and I started, and I mean, I acted very unprofessionally, but I couldn't compromise. I thought I had earned the right and the privilege to be in charge. I had already produced Little Murders. We had already done, I think we had done Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sex but Was Afraid to Ask with and for Woody Allen. You'll notice the production entity is Rollins, Jaffe, Brodsky, and Gould. My late ex-partner was Jack Brodsky, and who knew David Rubin, who wrote the sex book. But I went way too far, and I also didn't have the right director, and I didn't know how to compromise, and I had to find out for myself what would the consequences be, because I knew what I wanted to do in that picture, which was called, at the time, what happened was that it evolved into What's Up, Doc? But like I said earlier, no hard feelings. I can't afford to have regrets. I mean, in terms of James Joyce is quoted as having said that a man of genius makes no mistakes. His errors are volitional and are the portals to discovery. I had to find out what this is all about. It's all about time management and money in business. And I had also, I mean, you know, so I certainly wasn't realistic, and I paid for it. I paid for it dearly, but I've always been in good faith, and not knowing that, I didn't understand this world, this business, and this world, you know.
I guess it's just strange that, you know, you had been in The Touch and Little Mermaid.
Well, and Little Murders, not Little Mermaid.
I don't know where Mermaid came from.
I know where it all comes from, but with The Touch, I mean, I recently read something that said that Ingmar Bergman was quoted as having said that I was difficult to work with, and not only was that not true, but he went on record on the Dick Cavett show, because we expected me. This was this is pre The Long Goodbye. And, and he said, I'm a total team player, and I have no ego in this. I'm just one of us. I don't care, who anyone is. And so, that was because Bergman, the one of the last things he said, and we talked again, and I even saw him again, Ingmar. He said to me, when I was finishing up work in Stockholm, he said, when you direct, he said, and you will direct, he said, you mustn't act. And no matter who's doing it or who's done it, you'll know what I mean. And I thought, I don't know if you know what's going on in America. And this was in the 70s, but it's like the song, The Long Goodbye. It happens every day. This was the only way I could get here. And I had no plans. I mean, my goodness. I mean, I remember my long-term memory is really good. But then in terms of how I structure as Bob Altman would say, my verbiage, my language to express it, I can do better. Sometimes I think maybe, do I want to teach a course someplace? Well, what am I going to teach? What would I teach? Stardom. I thought that would be something good. Like Sly and the Family Stone. Everybody is a star.
What was that experience like doing The Touch? I mean, working with Max von Sydow and B.B. Anderson must have been just amazing.
And Ingmar Bergman and Sven Nykvist and the entire unit, the 18 people that he made his films with. So I say, when Ingmar was quoted as saying that, but at this point, Ingmar's no longer living, so I couldn't but say, Ingmar, you were so generous to me and so good to me, and you chose me to play your part, but so I wasn't difficult to work with, but Mike, I was impossible to do business with. And the reason I was impossible to do business with is that I didn't understand myself. And all I care about is the family. That's everything to me. That's why I work. That's what I stay in the world to make a living for. The family, give them an opportunity to wake up, and so it would have been so irresponsible if I was doing business outside and not understanding myself. It's not about me. It's always about us. So a guy had done an article for Life magazine. His name was Richard Merriman, and he had done an article on Charlie Chaplin, a major for Life. And then he also had done an article on Larry Olivier. And before I went over to work with Bergman, I interviewed with him, and he said to me, take a pad and pencil. And I said, I hope I haven't talked with you prematurely. I'm not coming across because of your interview. I'm coming across to see if I can work with the best white actors in the universe, Max and B.B. Anderson and their whole unit. And so when I finished, I said to Richard Merriman, is there time? Can I still contribute something? I have something I'd like to say now that I've done my assignment with Ingmar Bergman. He said, yeah. I said, well, I couldn't fully accept all the privileges that were given to me because I appeared to be so successful so early and so soon, and whether it was the privilege of working with the outstanding director or writer or conductor or composer, that I believe with all of my heart and soul, this is not political, that the great privilege, Mike, is to be conceived, born, and know yourself, and everything follows. And you know where we are in terms of politically and ecologically in this world, in terms of what's going on right now. You talk about being in the present. Here we are. What is today? Don't tell me. The 13th, I think. Let me make sure. Today is the 13th of November 2018. Yeah, that's a good one too. We made all that up. So I'm looking forward to Thanksgiving, and I'm looking forward to going and seeing my grandson and meeting his girlfriend, and So it's very moving, you know. But Bob Altman, when we were doing, when Soderbergh cast me to do Ocean's 11, and then subsequently we did 12 and 13, and then they even put me into Ocean's 8. But when we were doing Ocean's 11, and the night that we were setting up and telling the whole gang together what it was going to be, now I'm looking at my little scene I had with Matt Damon, and where I was at. And I don't like being tired, you know, and so I'm just ready. I know what I'm there to shoot. This is Ocean's 11, and Steven Soderbergh, who's a friend, he came up to me and he said to me, the ink on the face, was that an improvisation? And I thought, what are you talking about? I mean, I'm here. I'm getting prepared to do my scene with Matt Damon, and I hit my marks and that. And I say, "Oh, you mean you want me to wake up? What? Oh, the ink on the." And then he and I said at the same time, he being Steven Soderbergh, "The Long Goodbye." I said, "Oh yeah." I said, "Right, the ink on the face. Yes, that was an improvisation." I said, "Was that behavior acceptable to you?" He said, "Yeah, but it was so unexpected. You know, it was such a surprise." I said, "But that exhibited the kind of confidence and trust that Bob Altman had in me, and vice versa. Because if I had stopped, once I put the ink under my face and said, I got a big game when this fascist Nazi-like policeman was roughing me up, when we see the camera sees it through a two-way mirror, you know, and that scene in The Long Goodbye. I said, if I had stopped, and then I go into doing Al Jolson and doing, you know, I think Mammy or something like that. So, you know, I said that would have cost us about, 25 minutes of production time. And that's what it's about. It's, you know, it's about the management of time in relation to the resources that we have. So I took some enormous chances. I didn't come here to be anyone, but the Long Goodbye, I'm just it moves me because I've done stuff. I mean, I love what I do, and I remember on the Ocean's movies, I became friendly with Casey Affleck, but I never really met or talked with Benny, his big brother Ben, who was the best friend to Matt Damon. And so I decided to go to a party that Clooney was having for Argo, because I'm impressed. I was impressed with Ben Affleck's craft, and I thought he'd be pleased, you know, and I was able to say, you know, I don't like being impressed because I'm so deeply into the work and so into the life of what we're doing, you know, but I was impressed, and I thought you'd be pleased to know it. Not to it sounds a little pretentious or grandiose. I don't mean it that way. And so he was pleased. And then he said to me, I have a question for you. After all the stuff you've done, everything after all this time, have you ever done anything that you were sorry you did afterwards? I said, that's a great question. Let me give it a moment. My answer is no. It would be so disloyal. There's so many people dependent on our work, and with the crew and the team of people that we have to put together, some things work, some things don't work. We live and we die. We make it. Yeah, and I told you the quote of James Joyce. Yeah, no, life makes no mistakes.
It sounds like the experience that you had with A Glimpse of Tiger actually might have made you a better person and made you more aware of the difficulty.
Oh my God, I didn't even say Glimpse of Tiger. Oh my God, A Glimpse of Tiger. Oh my goodness. I may have to write it because it was so crucial there. I mean, it's like when Bergman called me, because I said, you know, I can't say no to Ingmar Bergman. I mean, you know, but so I'll read his piece and then see if he'll call me in the West Village and then I can talk with him, you know, and so he called me, you know, and it was something like, no, his voice was so deep, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. It was like how I would make a vibration, a sound for a puppy or a dog or a baby or a child. You know, it was just like that. I said, okay, I'll come along. I'll do what you want me to do. And that was some experience, you know. But Bob Altman, when I showed Bob Altman, he was, and this was already, let me see. No, it's still, I don't think it was The Long Goodbye, but this was post A Glimpse of Tiger. I mean, I couldn't get any work because, I mean, you know, I paid for everything, by the way. I mean, they paid for everything. And they also had to have people, you know, to have me checked out, mentally and psychologically, you know. I mean, I had no judgment and no perspective, but I was able to get here to see for myself, oh, we don't matter how good you want to be. Oh, my goodness gracious. The President of the United States didn't have time or a coat to go to pay respects to all of our fallen soldiers from World War I. Give me a fucking break, will you? That experience is no good or bad. I mean, good or bad. That experience, wow. I don't want to be glib or anything like that. Yes, it gave me, but still I didn't know, because when Bergman called me, I mean, we didn't expect me. This was all about my first wife. Now, mind you, I started out before her, but it was all about Barbara, you know. It's so interesting, you know. It's like Jim Brolin, who's a nice guy, and in the movie that, the second movie I did for Peter Hyams, Capricorn 1, I saved his life. And Brolin said to me at the 40th anniversary of Capricorn 1, he said to me, you're a better agent for me than my own agent. And I said, do you think that this is business to me? No, I'm devoted to my son and his mother. I don't care who anybody is, but we all have limitations. And Bergman and Ingmar said to me, like very early on in the process of the film, filming The Touch, he said, you've gone beyond your limits and you'll have to live more to understand what you've done. And at that moment, I was, secure in playing him. He chose me to play him, you know, but I had no confidence in me, and I didn't know I was this transparent. You can see it all through here, you know, see it all. So let me see, the experience of A Glimpse of Tiger. Oh my God, I would have made the picture. I mean, I know I was incapable and unwilling to compromise. And now if I were working with or teaching or doing something, you know, I would just say, once you have to be able to compromise. You've got to be able to follow, even if you don't agree. You know, there's no room for ego or vanity or anything like that. And I don't, you know, but again, the only way I could, and I'm not proud of it, you know, I mean, I find that a grain of pride is good for the heart, but no more than that. It's blinding. And, you know, my director on A Glimpse of Tiger, and I chose him, was Tony Harvey, who had been Stanley Kubrick's editor on Dr. Strangelove. And he wasn't the right director for me yet, because I said to him, I've got the crew. The crew's worked with me on the first picture that I produced. I mean, they're with me. And now I've got all of Ingmar's craft here. Give me 5 or 8 minutes just to come down and to be there and get a sense of it. And then you take the whole thing over. But you're acting like the director before I come here. I don't need any credit. I don't even need identity, but I need to be free. Why, you know, I need to be free. And I said to David Beagleman, who was my agent, you know, who wound up killing himself, not over that. And he ran Columbia Pictures. I said, this picture can make itself. Let me do it. Let me do it. The crew is with me. Let me do it. And we couldn't let me do it. It's too bad. But it all turned out right. And then What's Up, Doc was a successful picture, very successful. And who knows what Glimpse of Tiger might have been. I don't know how good. Herman Rauscher wrote it, and A Glimpse of Tiger to me was The Little Prince, and the prince. I was the aviator in urban New York. Now it's always now, and Kim Darby was the girl. She was the prince.
You worked with Mark Rydell as an actor in The Long Goodbye, and then as a director in Harry and Walter Go to New York. And I'm curious, how was it to have him switch roles like that for you?
I don't think that. It's for me, it's all one thing. Nate wasn't switching roles. When he said something, told us about the Cowboys, when he directed John Wayne and the Cowboys, and he got off on John Wayne, because John Wayne, but still John Wayne. I mean, Mark Rydell, people do what they do. I mean, I'm kind of allergic to ego. When Ingmar Bergman took me to the movies one Sunday, and he showed me that, we went to see a picture called Kess. It was about a boy and his trained falcon, and by Ken Loach. And Ingmar said told me that day that his masters in terms of cinema were Alfred Hitchcock for pure imagination, and William Wyler, who was a friend because he had directed Funny Girl. And I knew Willie Wyler, and Willie as an administrative producer-director. And then Ingmar told me, he said to me that the first time he went to the movies as a younger person, and he saw Mae West, he said he went home and masturbated immediately. Isn't that great? I wonder if I should see about a book. A book has to be fun for me to do. I don't want to be exploitative, and everybody does it, and I find it boring, but there's a lot to share, but I don't know.
Those scenes of you and Mark Rydell are just... Those are some of my favorite bits, especially when he and his boys are stripping down to their underwear. That is just, my jaw was on the floor. Both times he shows up, he does something that is outrageous with the Coke bottle.
He's a wonderful actor. I just saw him in Crime in the Streets with a young John Cassavetes. Mark Rydell. His name it was originally, I don't know his last name, but his first name is Morty. He's Morty. I don't know. I should think that Rydell wasn't his name. I could find out because they asked me to meet him. I think he's living at the actor's home or something, and he's quite well. He's well, but Mark Rydell's there, and he's also a very good piano player.
Did you ever play an instrument?
No, I was a tap dancer.
That's right. Didn't you and Peter Hyams take the same tap class?
I don't know, but Peter Hyams and I have become friends.
Did I read this right, that they released The Long Goodbye in March, and then they released Busting? Was that ready in time for the summer, and then they re-released Long Goodbye in the fall? I was
participating in doing Busting when The Long Goodbye opened at the Grauman's Chinese, and then when it opened, but there's a really good chase scene in Busting. But Peter came to me, because they had originally cast Ron Liebman, who's a fabulous actor, to play my partner, and then I just had a sense of something, because he was, I was told he was having the prop department make, because I think he was a lefty, hand make his holster, and I thought, I don't know that it's the right guy for this part, because Keneally, the character I played in that, was pushing things, but I loved Ron Liebman. And Ron Liebman said to me when I first met him, all the way pretty far back, when he was friendly with George Sherman, who was the original stage director for Little Murders, the stage production that I did, the first one where I played Alfred, and Liebman said, we don't need any more actors, we need directors. But so then doing, and so then David Picker, because United Artists not only did The Long Goodbye, they did Busting. And David Picker said, I don't think you got the right partner. And this is after, this is post A Glimpse of Tiger, and I couldn't wait for me even to talk because I got into so much trouble. Oh my God, I probably should write it. But he said when Ron Liebman played tennis with his 11-year-old daughter, that he would hit the ball back like a rocket at the kid or the baby. And he said, there's two actors, this Peter Boyle and this Robert Blake. And I said, I love them both, but Robert Blake is dangerous, and I'm interested in working with him. What's so funny? Well, still, I mean, I know, I understand. I've just been asked to talk about working with Robert Blake, and, you know, I thought I'll only talk about the experience since I chose him. I mean, I couldn't cast him. They had to be able to okay it. But Peter Hyams came to see me because Blake is a really good actor. And so Peter came to see me one day at lunch in my trailer, and this was the first thing that Peter ever directed, Busting, the way he had written before. But he said, as far as I know, and he said to me, if you fuck up my movie, I will throw acid in your eyes. And I thought, and then he said, and look at me in my eyes so you know I'm serious. And I thought, you got no problem with me. If I've pushed it as far as you can handle it or you can control it, there's no problem. And then later on, I said to him, I want your apology because you're telling me that you would have taken away my ability to earn a living. This is all I do. You know, this is all I do. But I've got a lot of experience. I don't know. And now at 80, you know, I mean, economics was not exactly a strong suit for me. It's a fascinating science, but we have this one life to live at a time. And then Peter and I, he, you know, we see one another for lunch occasionally. And then I did Capricorn 1 with him.
This question is a little far afield from what we've been discussing, but it's kind of in the same timeline, which is you did a TV special called Out to Lunch with the Muppets.
Oh, are you kidding? That's one of my favorite things. I play poker with a Cookie Monster.
Yeah, you worked with the Muppets a lot when it came to, you know, even having a cameo in the Muppet movie.
Oh, I know. He was great. Jim Henson was great to me, and Frank Oz. I mean, but Out to Lunch, that was amazing. I even sang on it. Joe Raposo wrote a song called Strange, and I did it. And then I also danced with Rita Moreno in it. And you know who was in the chorus in the group, because we did it a primetime ABC, the Muppet, the Electric Company, and the Children's Television Workshop. Oh, yeah. And let me see, what's his name? The great African-American actor who was in it.
Was it Morgan Freeman?
Exactly right. He's in it. And Judy Grobards, the wife of Bob Dishy, she's in it. But I did some nice dancing with Rita Moreno, but I got to play poker with the Cookie Monster. And then they used to do Saturday nights. I just spoke with today I spoke with John Mulaney, he was lovely and he's so good. And, but yesterday I spoke with Lorne Michaels, and, cause I'd done those very early, Saturday Night Lives, you know. And so I thanked him for taking my call, because I have a project that I want him to look at that I mentioned to John Mulaney today, who can write it. And Lauren said, thank you. I said, what do you think? He said, no, you were there. You're partly responsible for how well we did. You know, because the first season, they used the first show to as a representative show, and we won an Emmy Award. But those were great experiences, you know.
Yeah, there's a while there where I think you were one of the most frequent guest hosts. Like you and Steve Martin, I think, were neck and neck.
And probably maybe Buck Henry, and also what's his name? But I don't compare. I love Steve Martin. Did you see the Steve Martin Short special?
No, I haven't seen that. Is that recent?
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, Martin Short did the Mulaney series that we did for Fox where I play John Mulaney's neighbor and, Oscar. But, Martin Short is fabulous. And I love Steve Martin.
You talked a little bit about the sequel to The Long Goodbye, and I'm curious, was that talked about way back in '74? Because I know that...
No. In the course of my reading all of Chandler's stuff, I discovered and I recorded it something called The Curtain, when it was not yet Philip Marlowe, it was John Dalmas, and you could see where this was very early. You could see where The Big Sleep came from, because there's a lot of it is similar. But the Bacall character in it has a 10-year-old son, and he's the killer. And that really attracted me to it. And so I did a little bit of work with it and on it, and got Alan Rudolph to write a first draft, but I never could get any, because now it's still, the guy is much older. I mean, again, I have no say in anything. It's definitely worthwhile, it's very worthwhile. And also for it to be the character, and if it's still me and my age, but I still have the heart, the spirit, and the mind for it, and I haven't changed.
It doesn't seem like you've slowed down at all. Just the amount of projects that you worked on in the 70s seems to be equal to the projects that you're working on lately. Like I'll see new episodes of, Doubt or these things coming up, and it's just like, wow, yeah, Elliott's still out there, still going strong.
Oh, yeah, I'm out there. And now I don't know. I mean, I really don't know, because, again, in terms of not having made a business for myself and having broken out to see for myself how this business is run and where it's at, I guess I could have gone to school. I would teach a course in it. I can't have any regrets. I said to my wife, Jenny, I said, do you have any regrets? Now, Jenny married me 3 times. I'll be married to Jenny forever until she can do better. But Jenny is the mother of my sole daughter and my son Sam, and that's Jason's sister and brother. Half sister and brother, I don't think in halves. And also Jenny is the grandmother to my grandchildren, to Daisy and Henry. So I'm very grateful. So when I said to Jenny, do you have any regrets? She, in her way, said, oh, yeah, don't you? And I thought, and I said, no, I can't change anything. I've always meant well, and this is how we learn. And I said, my kids find that a little difficult, regrets. I mean, I'm not in denial, but would you prefer for me to say, oh, I should have done this, or I could have done this, or I would have done this? No, this is my life, and I'm still living it. And I say, because philosophy is very meaningful to me, and we all have our own. Hopefully, we should, and it's all related, because I believe on a certain level we're all the same, and I'm sure Philip Marlowe knows this, and he says, I say, that I believe there's nothing of value other than what we have to share, and that it's one thing to share goodness and accomplishment, it's another thing to share a problem. And once people are willing and capable of communicating directly like this, then we can see that no one of us can have a problem that one of us didn't have before.
It is almost an hour, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. I could talk to you all night, but that is not
I would like to hear it at some point, because I'm I have remnants of insecurity, because so much, but now that I'm at a level and at a place where I can't know that I'm going to be able to employ myself any longer. I can't know that. And I've got to, I think it would be the most honest for me with myself and in relation to my family and where I'm at, to just really be true. What I find is that I've recently found that what's true and what's real is not necessarily the same. And for me, what's true is life. Nature is true. What's real, sometimes we invent it. and then there are business interests that build on it, and then it's difficult sometimes to find like there's nothing there. But we invented everything, but not nature. We didn't invent life. Okay, and now I have your number in case I need some help, because as you could hear with my phones and how, it makes me nervous, I mean, for me to stay in one place and have to talk with anyone or with you, that's a little difficult, since some animal will come, some dinosaur will come and eat me.
I appreciate you taking the time, though. This has been wonderful, and I hope we can do it again sometime. That would be great.
Oh, my God. That's very optimistic. Thanks, Mike. I look forward to it. If you follow through, it'll be great. And sometime, maybe, not often, I try not to be indulgent ever, but, just you can call and say, hi, how you doing?
We are back, and we're talking about The Long Goodbye. I wanted to touch real briefly on the interesting story of this movie. When it was released, it was only released in a few markets, including Detroit, I found out while I was doing my research. It was released in a few cities in March of 1973, and it bombed. It really was not very well liked, and I think all of the reasons why we talked about before, as far as it's a little obtuse. You can't necessarily follow it that well. Elliott Gould mumbles through this. This guy, he drops the MF, these kind of things. And then that key, that coup de grace, which is what you talked about, Eric, that he shoots his best friend, and people really chafed under that. They did not think that this was Philip Marlowe whatsoever.
Yeah, I think they had a emotional investment in Bogart and Dick Powell, and possibly even James Garner. And so when Marlowe did something they didn't think was Marlowe-y, if social media had been around then, it would have gone crazy. But it's still been crazy anyway.
It's funny how these films that we talk about that we consider to be great movies weren't that well received when they were first released, right? And it makes me wonder, well, will we look back at something like, Armageddon and say, oh, you know what? I was wrong about that. That film is brilliant. But no, in terms of A Long Goodbye, I could see why people had a problem with it. If I recall, I wasn't around when The Long Goodbye came out, but I remember seeing archived marketing materials to try to play it up like a comedy where the posters looked like a Mad Magazine cover or something like that. Do you know if the marketing harmed the film at all, Mike? Or because I could see why people had issues with the idea of taking like an iconic character and just basically seemingly pissing on it.
Well, that was the thing, was when it was first released, it was released with the poster image that, strangely enough, is on the Kino and the Arrow discs, which is the one of him with the gun, and it's kind of blue, and it's like Nothing Says Goodbye, like a bullet. And there are some versions that have that with a cat on his shoulder, these kind of things. And so that was the original advertising campaign, and they ended up, when they pulled the movie, they pulled that campaign, and the Mad Magazine, the Jack Davis stuff was actually the second version of it. So when they re-released it in October of 1973, that's when they had the Mad Magazine thing. I think the pendulum swung a little too far, personally. The Mad Magazine version is the one I was familiar with from like the VHS cover, those kind of things. And I find it interesting that it's not the one that's on the DVDs or the Blu-rays that are released now. But yeah, they went the other way and tried to play up the more comic elements of it, which I don't think it's necessarily that. I think it fits more with that first poster image, but they had to do something to say, as they would say in today's parlance, this isn't your dad's Philip Marlowe.
The movie Marlowe starring James Gardner, there's some goofy moments in that.
The death of Bruce Lee
and stuff like that. It's got like its tongue in its cheek, that kind of thing. And you've had, I would say, the earliest attempt at sort of neo-noir might have been Harper, the film starring Paul Newman. But the only thing I could think of that might have I could see where like fans might have been jarred by the representation of their favorite character might have been like Kiss Me Deadly, where they take the Mike Hammer character and they make him an utter asshole. No apologies. It's meant to be an anti hard-boiled private detective movie. Which I adore. I love that movie too. But I know that Mickey Spillane absolutely hated that film. Hated it. And I can imagine why some people, the old school film critics might have been turned off by The Long Goodbye, because how dare you piss on, this long tradition of noir and, Philip Marlowe and the Big Sleep and stuff like that. Because this is one of the earliest takes on that kind of thing. No one had really seen anything like that before, with the exception of maybe, I don't know, you had things that were outright parodies that were obvious parodies, but they didn't come out till later than that. What was the film we discussed during the Maltese Falcon, Mike? The one with George Segal, The Big Bird, or
the Blackbird.
The Blackbird, right? Or Murder by Death or something like that. This film is funny. It's a parody in parts. It's also a satire, but there's moments that are deadly serious.
I think Harper leads into this movie nicely because Lou Harper's an ambiguous character and a kind of reinvention of the private eye for a later age. And by the way, it was written by William Goldman, who just died.
Yeah.
So we should do a shout out about that. But I think that they were kind of deconstructing that genre as far back as the kind of mid-1960, 66 when Harper came out. This movie is a continuation of that process until it got to the silly stuff like The Cheap Detective with Peter Falk, which I love for all the wrong reasons. But, I think that process started well before this film.
Oh, I agree with you, but I think that what makes this film different is the tone and the almost sacrilegious thing to cast someone like Elliott Gould and not someone like Steve McQueen in that part. Because with something like Harper, it was Paul Newman. Marlowe was Jim Gardner. It was you could see those guys in a part of a hard-boiled private eye maybe, or because they were leading men types, whereas Elliott Gould was this quirky guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And the weird thing about Harper too, of course, is that everybody else in the movie is great except Paul Newman. But Elliott Gould wouldn't be your first choice for Philip Marlowe under any circumstances.
What? I'm sorry, I thought Newman was great in that. I'm a big fan of the movie Harper.
I love the movie. I just don't like him mugging all the time.
But by the way, the actual character is Archer, but that's another thing.
I haven't seen the movie, or The Drowning Pool, so I can't give my opinion whatsoever.
Drowning Pool, not so good.
No, definitely not.
I tried like crazy to find the TV version of The Long Goodbye that was done on Climax. I think was it NBC that did Climax? But the old TV show, which some of those episodes have been preserved and you can find them, like the original adaptation of Casino Royale with Peter Lorre, those kind of things.
With Jimmy Bond?
Yeah, Jimmy Bond. I can't find Dick Powell revising his role or revisiting his role as Philip Marlowe in The Long Goodbye, taking that story and boiling it down to an hour. And that's the thing I'm just so curious about. How could you boil this movie down to an hour, this book down to an hour? Because it is already tough enough to bring it down to an hour and a half, 2 hours. So I would be very curious about that. And I want to know why people know this story about the person who plays a corpse getting up and walking off on live TV. That is part and parcel. When you look up Climax, The Long Goodbye, whatever the date was, that story comes with that every single time. And it's like, okay, well, somebody obviously has seen that and told that story, but I haven't seen it, and I would love to see that. So, I mean, that's harder to find than that Marlowe 2007 TV pilot, which is just like, you Google that and it's right out there on YouTube.
Yeah, which is terrible.
Who was in that one?
I don't know the actor's name, but he was in the American version of Life on Mars.
Jason O'Mara, I think it was.
Yeah, O'Mara is his last name. I can't remember his first name, but he plays Philip Marlowe in that. And it's not even like, it's just a character who happens to be called Philip Marlowe, who happens to be a private detective.
I think that was my boy Rob Bowman directing that one too.
Yeah, I mean, there were other adaptations like that. There was Banyan, I think it was, with the guy that was in Medium Cool, Robert Forster. There were TV series that did it better than a lot of some of the movies about that kind of thing. So there were kind of 1940s private eyes.
I thought James Gardner was a better Marlowe in the Rockford Files than he was in the movie Marlowe.
Yeah, I mean, Jim Rockford was a man of his time, but he had that same moral code.
I found it interesting that in the Leigh Brackett screenplay, the 1972 version of the screenplay, he is constantly listening to his messages, which kind of reminds me both of Jim Rockford and also going back to that Mike Hammer from Kiss Me Deadly, who had one of the first answering machines that we ever saw, this huge reel-to-reel player on his wall. But yeah, he's constantly listening to his messages. So Marlowe has an office in that version, in that Leigh Brackett version, which he doesn't seem to have an office in the Altman film. And when he goes to that office in the Leigh Brackett script, he'll listen and it's always creditors trying to get money out of him, which really plays up the idea of him being on the skids. And we kind of get that more from the wardrobe and the living conditions that he's in versus actually having creditors calling and those kind of things when it comes to the final version. The other thing I found interesting in the Brackett script was that Eileen, she did end up killing Sylvia, so she killed the wife that Terry killed in the movie, and Marlowe basically just has to ask her multiple times, and then she finally confesses. And it was just this kind of like, oh, well, that was kind of strange. And so he kind of does the same thing when it comes to, was your husband sleeping with Sylvia Lennox in the movie? And she finally admits it. But then I liked, again, the way that it was undercut by the cops are like, yeah, we already know that. And that doesn't play any role when it comes to who actually killed Sylvia Lennox, other than now Marlowe thinks, oh yeah, for sure, it must have been Roger that killed her, and it can't be my buddy Terry.
He's got that enormous blind spot, and that kind of makes him a sympathetic character in the end, even after he shot him, and even after you got that him dancing with the old lady at the end of it and all that kind of thing. It actually makes us sympathetic to Marlowe in spite of that action. I kind of like that.
I was just looking at some of my highlights from the reviews in the movie, and some of the stuff I wrote down was based feebly on the Philip Marlowe detection character. Mr. Altman has been a study in the protracted scene, the heavy-handed play, and the rather repulsive cinematic gratuity. So yeah, people didn't necessarily like this one that often.
Take a look at Roger Ebert's review where he says that Eileen Wade is drenched, which I didn't get from the movie, but apparently it had a big effect on Roger Ebert.
Roger Ebert is an example of some critics that went back and revisited the film and came away with a much more positive review, because initially Ebert gave it like a 3-star review, and his latest review, which you can read on his website, gives it 4 stars. He raves about it. Yeah, I'm curious as to, because I know Pauline Kael, who is, always like, she must have had a huge crush on Robert Altman, right? I mean, she loved everything he did, but she raved about the film. And, I don't know if Vincent Canby ever came back, rewatched it and changed his mind either. But a lot of the critics had since revisited it and rethought what they originally thought about the whole thing.
I think we all do that during extent. And when I first saw, say, Last Tango in Paris, I cried because it was so sad. And then I saw it this time and realized that the Marlon Brando character was another prick all the way through it. We do change the way we view movies, and kind of revisiting them like that can be really educational, if nothing else.
Here's a good quote from the New American from April 6, 1973 by Walter F. Herman under the headline, "Long Goodbye, R is Rotten." If he could just take that lousy cigarette out of his mouth for 5 lousy seconds, you could understand his audio better and not have to recommend him to the Cancer Society's Sad Sack Division.
There's even a scene in there where he's got the cigarette in his mouth and it's not lit.
Have you guys, did you have a chance to watch the Japanese miniseries that was based on The Long Goodbye?
I have not, and I'm sorry I haven't.
I will tell you, if you want something that is more faithful, if you really have your panties in a bunch that this was not a faithful adaptation, that the Japanese miniseries that was, I think it was 2014, they did a really good job. Now, it is transplanted from America in the 1950s to Japan in the 1950s, which is kind of fitting because there's a lot of post-war stuff that is going on in the book. There's gangsters in Japan, just like there's gangsters in the United States. You know, we've got the parallels there. And yeah, it's really interesting the way that they transport this over to Japan and then make it fit very well. If anything, the convolutions of the book are also in the miniseries, which is, I think it's 5 hours long. So you get a lot more of this kind of stuff, and you get those side characters. You get more about, you know, the sisters and all these kind of things. So I would say that if you want a more faithful adaptation, definitely check that out. It is out there. There's a fan subbed version that is available. The subtitles are a little rough because they run off the sides of the screen sometimes. It could be formatted a little bit better, but I'm not going to be a dick about somebody fan subbing something because I couldn't speak Japanese to save my life. So it was really kind of a nice take on that. And they don't do the thing where Philip Marlowe's name is like the kanji version of Philip Marlowe or whatever. And it's interesting, the Roger Wade type character, he's almost like a Eduardo Rampo type character. He writes the Euroguro fiction, and so it's more the pulpy kind of stuff. So it's interesting when it comes to that. And I did find that interesting, the way that Roger Wade in the book is almost a stand-in for Chandler, and the way that he will talk about writing, and that he writes in the same method that Chandler did when it came to using these yellow pieces of paper to type onto and all this kind of stuff. And I think it's the most self-aware of Chandler's books, having this writer character in there. But again, it's a little self-indulgent. And yeah, I'll cut him some slack since his first wife was dying, or second wife, I can't remember. Yeah, second wife was dying. But at the same time, it's like, it felt like he was really struggling to bring pulp out of the gutter, to bring detective fiction out of the gutter. But for me, it's never been in the gutter. And sometimes I kind of like the gutter better than I like the lofty stuff.
I've always admired Chandler more than I liked him. The Big Sleep is pretty well written, but I get annoyed at how he just doesn't seem to care about plot. You know, you can do both. You can have great characterizations, but you could also have a good, solid plot, you know, and things like that. I think I prefer his short stories to his novels. But when we talk about, like, the two writers are considered kings of this genre, Marlowe, Hammett, I've always preferred Hammett.
Yeah, I mean, I like Chandler for his turn of phrase, but I definitely think that Hammett was superior as far as plotting and for giving us a lived-in feeling.
All right, we're going to take another break and play a preview for next week's show.
Here's to both of you. May you pay your rent on the first.
With you, it's not another love affair, a night of passing whispers.
What's there to do in this neighborhood?
Let's see if you remember how to operate on $1,000 blowjob. Taking panties off. Last one undressed gets their navel kissed from the inside.
I really believed I was helpless. Like some kind of a pet.
I will put the Donny Osmond poster over there.
My tongue will tell the anger of my heart, or else my heart concealing it will break.
Oh, now you're not going to play hard to get, are you?
Yep.
Yes, dear. And how old are you?
Well, I just turned 25 last week.
Oh, I'm really sorry. You're much too old for the part.
Oh, well. Dance? Well, you ever hear of Martha Graham?
What's up? Hurt you, baby? Okay.
I'm out of trouble. I can't take these.
Come on, speculate.
Here? Oh.
Oh, you're that little girl, don't you?
Call an ambulance. Quick.
With you, it's not another love affair. A day of empty gazes. A day of unfulfilled wishes. Bitter kisses. Unlearned lessons. Leaving no lasting impression.
That's where we'll be back next week with a discussion of Chuck Vincent's Roommates, where I'll be joined by Ashley West and Heather Drain. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts on this epic Chandler journey, Eric and Terry. So, Eric, what is the latest with you, sir?
Preparing for Thanksgiving. I'm smoking a turkey. Very excited about that. In the meantime, I'm working on my little project, which I shall premiere on Medium, a new blog, focusing, sort of doing what I do with film, but with the current state of media, particularly with this current political environment. So that's my latest thing. So it's been taking me a while to organize it because the news keeps changing every day here. And I keep having to keep changing up what it is that I want to talk about and all that stuff. But that's going to be my next project. I don't have a name for it yet, but an announcement will be forthcoming.
Are you going to hire a female intern so you can karate chop her arm and take a microphone away from her?
And then I get to sue the White House. Sure.
And how about you, Terry?
Well, I'm actually going to an anime-themed cafe soon for my wife's birthday next week. So I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be a lot of fun with a lot of weird food and a lot of weird decorations. But I'm also rewatching The Other Side of the Wind for my podcast because we're going to do an episode about it. And I want to do it justice. I think it's interesting. I think they put it together beautifully, and it's in some ways the most striking of Orson Welles' later films.
Yeah, I need to watch that one a second time, and I think I'm going to do the same, put together an episode about that. So trying to get a hold of some of the people that were behind this recent release, and yeah, that should be a lot of fun to talk about that movie.
It's not often you get to talk about a new Orson Welles movie.
Well, thank you again so much, guys, for being on this show and for being on the other two Chandler-themed shows. I really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody for listening. Please head on over to the website projection-booth.com where you can find out more about today's episode. You'll also find links over to iTunes where you can rate and review the show, and to Patreon where you can make a donation to the show. Donors get early access to every episode as long as I'm not running late. Every donation and every rating we get helps the Projection Booth take over the world.
There's a long goodbye, and it happens every day when some passerby invites your eye to come her way. Even as she smiles a quick hello, you let her go, you let the moment fly. Too late you turn your head, you know you said the long goodbye. Can you recognize the theme? On some other street, two people meet as in a dream, running for a plane through the rain. If the heart is quicker than the eye, they could be lovers until they die. It's too late to try when a missed hello becomes a long goodbye. Can you recognize the theme? On some other street, two people meet as in a dream, running for a plane through the rain. If the heart is quicker than the eye, they could be lovers until they die. It's too late to try when a missed hello becomes a long goodbye. Don't you try to be nice to me now. I'm leaving and it's goodbye. I ain't running after you in the rain when you're catching a plane. No more. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. I'm through this time and I mean it. In fact, I don't know if I ever even did like you except for your body. Your body was good. Well, let's say so long.
If you enjoy this show and want more people to know about it, head on over to iTunes, leave a comment, and rate it 5 stars. Make sure you like and share us on Facebook, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Just search for Christopher Media. Thank you in advance for supporting Christopher Media by clicking on the PayPal button and by clicking through to all the sponsors who support ChristopherMedia.net. Most importantly, we would like to take the time to extend an extra special thanks to you. Christopher Media could not exist without your support. Thank you for visiting ChristopherMedia.net, and thank you for listening. Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.